I watched my system being presented without my name on it. Through the conference room glass, I could see Darren flipping through the deck. Celia smiled at the charts. Warren, our department head, stood proudly like a man who'd built something himself. But I was the one who wrote every line of logic they were now calling collaborative innovation. My name is Arden Vale, 35, senior systems engineer at Orbion. I've worked here for 8 years, long enough to know how this place works, and just naive enough to think this time would be different. I was the only woman on my level, the lowest paid one too. When the Virion Logistics proposal landed, $5.8 million for an adaptive AI-driven supply chain platform, nobody wanted it. Too complex, too fast, too many points of failure. Warren dropped it on my desk like a discarded memo. Take a stab, Arden. See if you can make sense of it. I didn't just make sense of it. I built it. For 6 months, I disappeared into that project. Skipped birthdays, canceled travel, spent nights debugging in silence while the office slept. I solved a routing challenge that a dozen consultants said was unfixable. My model saved the client millions on paper. But today, my name wasn't even on the slides. Celia was credited with project oversight. Darren got architecture insights. Warren claimed strategic vision. Me? I was watching through a wall, uninvited, unacknowledged. I'd asked for a raise 6 months ago, calmly, with numbers. Darren made almost 20% more than me. He hadn't touched production code in over a year. Warren smiled and said, "Let's revisit after Q2. That was 2 quarters ago. The slides kept flipping. And then Ren Takahashi, the CEO from Virion, pointed to a flowchart I designed at 3 a.m. And who wrote the logic for this regional reroute engine? Silence. Marcus looked confused. Celia looked down. Darren said something vague about teamwork. No one mentioned my name, and I realized it wasn't just a mistake. It was a strategy. They didn't forget me. They planned around me. I walked away. I didn't make a scene. I didn't say a word. But back at my desk, I opened my laptop and made a quiet decision. I saved a draft email. In it, I attached the early-stage system outline I submitted on day 3, stored in my folder untouched by anyone else, the build logs showing 6 months of version control activity, every major commit under my ID, and the diagram from the deck, copied exactly, minus the caption with my name. I didn't send it, not yet. If you're still here, maybe at your desk, maybe standing outside a meeting you weren't invited to, leave a trace. Just tell me where you're listening from. And if this feels close to home, don't hesitate to like this video or share it with someone who's been there. And subscribe, because you'll want to know how this story continues. The next morning, Warren called me in. No greeting, no eye contact, just a finger tapping on his phone and a tight-lipped, "Close the door." I knew that tone. It was the same one he used when someone pushed too far, when someone forgot their place. "You're upset," he said flatly, still scrolling. "I get it, but this is how we do things here. We play to our strengths. Darren's polished, Celia's presentable. You're more behind the scenes." I didn't answer. He looked up. "You're not really client-facing, Arden. You know that, right? You get too deep into the weeds, too technical, not executive-ready." I blinked, holding still, letting the words sit where they landed. "And look," he added, softening his voice like a performance, "you'll still be involved in implementation. It's not like we're cutting you out." He already had. "And the raise?" I asked, voice steady. He frowned, like I'd said something inconvenient. "Now's not the time to discuss comp. Let's land the deal first, then we can reevaluate." Reevaluate. That was the 4th time he'd used that word this year. It meant delay. It meant dismiss. It meant, "You're not important unless someone more powerful says so." I walked out of his office, back straight, steps calm. At my desk, I didn't code. I didn't email. I didn't speak. I opened a clean document and started writing something else entirely. A memo. Not a complaint. Not a confrontation. Just a simple technical breakdown of the system. Authored, signed, and dated. Then I made a list, everything I'd contributed, every module I'd owned, every performance metric I'd improved. Every time someone else had spoken over me, every time team effort meant I worked while someone else got promoted. By lunch, I had a 10-page document. I saved it to a folder labeled If They Ask. That afternoon, I found Celia in the break room. She smiled, too wide. "Big day yesterday," she said. "You should be proud. Your work really shined." "My work?" I asked. She hesitated. "I mean, the team's work, obviously." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I saw it clearly now. They didn't think I'd do anything. They thought I'd take it, like always, like most do. They thought a quiet woman meant a powerless one. That silence meant submission. They were wrong. Later that evening, I stayed behind, long after the lights dimmed and the floor fell quiet. I opened the presentation deck from the client server, one I now had mirrored on a private, time-stamped archive. Then I added a password to my project folder, not to hide anything, just to control access. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't vent to my sister. I didn't pour a glass of wine and spiral into a what-if monologue. Instead, I made a list of exactly what I'd need to say when the right person finally asked. They thought the betrayal was done, but they hadn't seen the part where the system breaks, because the one who built it isn't there to catch the fall. In a place like Orbian, silence wasn't suspicious. It was expected. We were engineers. Quiet was normal. That made it easy to hide in plain sight. The Monday after the pitch, everyone walked a little taller. Warren was all handshakes and congratulations. Darren floated between meetings like a man whose name might soon be on a plaque. Celia printed out the client feedback and pinned it to the break room corkboard. No one asked me a thing. Perfect. While they played public victory, I went to work behind the curtain, not out of pettiness, out of survival. I started with the codebase. Officially, I was still the primary committer on the repository, but access was wide, too wide. Anyone with the right credentials could touch the core logic, break it, claim it, change history. So I set permissions, quietly, no announcements, no flags, just a small shift in version control, from open edit to protected branch. Only I could push changes now. Next, the documentation. I exported a full set of architecture diagrams and process notes, time-stamped, signed, and encrypted, and uploaded them to my private drive. The originals? Still on the server, still public, but stripped of the annotations that actually made them usable. Then I added something new. A shadow copy of the spec, embedded with trace markers, digital watermarks that proved authorship, invisible to anyone not looking, unmistakable to anyone who was. I did all this between check-ins. While the others prepped for client calls they didn't know how to lead, I was locking the doors they hadn't even noticed were open. Warren didn't notice. He was too busy taking calls from leadership, but Darren noticed, just a little. By Wednesday, he was hovering near my desk. "Hey," he said, too casually. "Can you walk me through that fallback routing sequence again, the one for Southeast Asia?" I clicked through to an unrelated tab. "Didn't you present that last week?" He laughed. "Sure, yeah, but it'd be good to, align before the next round." "Check the internal doc," I said. He left with a smile and a scratch behind his ear. Celia followed 2 hours later, asking if I could help her translate some of the back-end logic into plain English for the client onboarding packet. I told her I'd email it. I didn't, because I was done feeding them. They hadn't just stolen my work. They'd built a parade float on top of it and waved from above while I watched from the crowd. Now they'd have to steer it without a map. On paper, I was still the system owner. That meant I still had full commit rights, end-to-end system visibility, and direct access to the Virion node analytics. I'd kept those privileges quiet, never flaunted them, never challenged anyone with them. I just never handed them over. And now they were the only reason I saw what was coming. It started with something small, a variance spike in the Southeast Asia model, 0.2% above baseline. Barely enough to flag, but I knew what it meant. One of the fallback conditions was firing too early. I'd seen this before. The algorithm was reacting instead of anticipating. Just slightly, but slight was enough. It would lead to missed arrival estimates. Inventory rerouted too conservatively. A drop in Virion's shipping efficiency metrics. Nothing catastrophic, but enough for a question to surface. I didn't fix it. I documented it, quietly, logged the pattern, printed a snapshot, then waited. By Tuesday, Darren had stopped by my desk twice. both times under the guise of something else. "You doing okay?" he asked casually. "This rollout's a beast, huh?" I nodded without looking up. On Wednesday, Celia sent a Slack message about reviewing some back-end logic just for alignment. I replied with a thumbs-up emoji, never followed up. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I was simply not rescuing people who never credited me when I did. By Thursday, the client noticed. The morning report came in with a yellow flag beside the Singapore route. Routing time had increased by nearly 6 hours due to a misprioritized weather delay. The fallback algorithm had pulled data from the wrong input feed, one that was intended as backup, not primary. The fix was simple, but no one knew where it lived. Ren Takahashi's name appeared in our internal chatter for the first time since the pitch. She'd asked for clarification, nothing dramatic, no blame, just an observation and a request. Explain the logic. The message bounced around. Warren looped in Darren. Darren asked Celia. Celia opened the wrong documentation. Marcus emailed me privately, asking if I had a legacy copy of the original flow. I didn't respond. Instead, I watched the gap widen. Not because I wanted the project to fail, but because I needed it to reflect the truth, that none of them could steer what I had built. The next morning, I received a calendar invite. Directly from Ren, there was no subject line. Just a time, a location, and my name on it. No one else's. I didn't forward it. I didn't tell Warren. I didn't ask permission. I printed out the latest logs, highlighted the thresholds I'd adjusted in phase 2 of the build, packed them into a binder I kept in my drawer, the one labeled with a single word, fallback. When I arrived at the meeting, Ren was already seated. Her team had laptops open, calm, focused. Warren walked in 4 minutes later, clearly unprepared for what he just walked into. He looked from me to Ren to the single empty chair at the head of the table. "Didn't know Arden was joining?" he said. "She's not joining," Ren replied. "She's leading," she turned to me. "Whenever you're ready." I opened the binder, slid the printout to the center of the table, and said the words I'd rehearsed the night before. "Let's walk through the logic, line by line." The first time I explained the system, no one listened. This time, no one interrupted. I moved through each section of the fallback protocol slowly, deliberately, describing the logic behind every threshold, every trigger, every adaptive condition that allowed the engine to reroute in real time. I didn't embellish. I didn't perform. I explained. Because when you've built something from the ground up, you don't need to sell it. You just open the blueprint and point. I watched Ren follow along page by page, nodding occasionally, stopping only to ask the kind of questions that tell you exactly how closely someone is listening. Her team took notes. They didn't look to Warren. They didn't even look confused, because suddenly everything made sense. They weren't confused by the system. They were confused by why I hadn't been the one explaining it all along. When I finished, I closed the binder and waited. No one said anything. Then Ren looked at Warren, calm, curious, but sharp. "So," she said, "you built this together?" Warren shifted in his seat. "Arden was a key contributor," he said too quickly. "She handled certain modules, but the architecture as a whole was shaped through a collaborative. She just walked us through decisions no one else could explain." Ren didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. But the sentence was a scalpel. Warren tried to smile. "Of course. I mean, Arden's brilliant, no question, but this has always been a team effort." She looked back at me. "Is that true?" I could have answered with a monologue, with a list of every night I worked past midnight, every weekend I skipped, every part of the system that still bore my fingerprint. But I didn't. I just said, I was the architect. That was enough. Ren tapped her pen against the folder once, like a decision being made in her mind. "In that case," she said quietly, "I'd like future updates to come directly from you, starting today." Warren's smile didn't fall. It collapsed. I didn't gloat. I didn't even look at him. This wasn't about him, not anymore. After the meeting, I walked past the rows of cubicles, binder in hand, feeling the weight of something shift. Eyes turned, not in admiration, not in gossip, but in quiet recalibration. They were watching someone they thought they understood become someone they could no longer dismiss. Back at my desk, I opened my inbox and saw a new thread already waiting. Subject, implementation briefing, ownership transfer. And below that, Wren's assistant requesting a direct status walkthrough, addressed only to me. The request came just after lunch. Warren's tone was casual, but I could feel the tension behind it, like a smile stretched too thin. He chose the same conference room he always did when he wanted silence to feel like power. No windows, neutral lighting, a single table, 2 chairs, and a contract folder placed precisely in the center. He sat first. I didn't. There were no introductions, no pleasantries. Just a motion toward the folder and a clipped line. "We need your sign-off for Virion's specs." I opened it. My name wasn't on the title page. I wasn't listed under system design, but I was there in the last line, as the person authorized to validate the technical implementation. Nothing more. Just a signature to seal someone else's story. I didn't speak. Not yet. Warren began to fill the silence. "Titles are internal," he said. "This is standard. You'll remain the technical lead under the delivery team. It's aligned with how we've structured previous contracts." I let him finish. Then I closed the folder, placed both hands on the table, and gave him what he didn't expect. Structure. "I'll sign under 3 conditions." He leaned back, smiled like he'd rehearsed this. "1, I said. I'm listed as lead architect in all technical documentation, internal and external." He didn't blink. 2, I lead the implementation team, alone, no co-signers, no shadow managers. Still no reaction. 3, I receive a 15% salary increase effective immediately. That got a response. He laughed, one of those short, breathless laughs people give when they don't know what else to do. 15%? Arden, come on, that's still less than Marcus, I said, and he didn't write a single module. The room went still. He adjusted his sleeves, talked about team optics, about fairness, about how this wasn't the time to push individual agendas. I let him talk. Then I stood up, walked to the door, and locked it. No drama, no threat, just space, so he'd have no choice but to sit with the reality of what I was about to say. "You need my name," I said. "Not because I'm difficult, not because I'm loud, but because the system doesn't function without the person who built it." He stared at me. "You want to sign off?" I said. "You get it. Under my terms. You have until 5. I unlocked the door, walked out. My legs were trembling by the time I reached my desk. Not from fear, something else, like a current that had been held back for too long finally breaking loose. I opened my notebook and wrote a single sentence in the margin. This time, they don't get to rewrite the version history. They moved faster than I expected. At 3:26 p.m., a message popped into my inbox. HR would like a quick sync before end of day. No subject line, no attachment, just a polite sentence meant to sound routine. I read it once, then again, and stood up without responding. The hallway to the HR wing always felt longer than the others. Carpeted, soft-lit, quiet in a way that didn't invite noise. Every step felt like it had already been measured. When I arrived, Vanessa Kruger was already waiting. She didn't smile, didn't ask how I was, just gestured to the seat across from hers with practiced efficiency. Her blazer was gray, her expression was beige. Everything about her posture said, "Let's make this smooth." Warren sat beside her, no folder this time, just a pen between his fingers and the same look he'd worn in meetings for years, something between amusement and disdain. I sat down. Vanessa opened with acknowledgments. She thanked me for my efforts, noted the company's appreciation for my technical depth, mentioned how impressed the client seemed to be. Every word was chosen for neutrality, praise without power. Then came the shift. "There have been concerns," she said, "about how certain communications have unfolded, especially in client-facing contexts." She didn't name Wren, she didn't need to. She leaned slightly forward the way professionals do when they're about to call you difficult without using the word. "At Orbian, we value collaboration. We believe leadership is earned through consistency, alignment, and trust. And while your work speaks volumes, the approach you've taken has raised questions." She reached for a folder, slim, neat, and slid it across the table toward me. I didn't open it immediately. I looked at her hands instead, then at Warren's eyes, then finally down at the document that was supposed to smooth everything over. Inside was a version of the truth they were willing to tolerate. I was listed as a key contributor, not the architect, not the lead, just another part of the machine. They offered a role on the implementation team, not to lead it, just to support it, and in place of the 15% raise I'd asked for, a 5% bonus. One time, performance-based, a pat on the head disguised as recognition. I let the silence stretch. Vanessa didn't break it. Warren didn't either. He just watched me with the patience of someone convinced I would fold the way I always had, but I didn't touch the paper. I remembered the last time I'd asked for a raise, months ago. I remembered the way Warren had smiled, told me we'd revisit the numbers after the quarter closed. I remembered how it never came up again. Now here it was, wrapped in a ribbon of process. I looked up, not at Vanessa, not at Warren, at the space between them. "I've documented my terms," I said. "They haven't changed." Vanessa shifted in her seat. Her voice softened, but only slightly. "We'd like to avoid escalation." Her version of a warning. Warren leaned forward, pen tapping once against the table. "Think carefully, Arden. This project is a spotlight, the kind you don't get twice." I reached into my folder, pulled out a single page, my original memo, the one I'd written the night after. Ren asked me to walk her team through the logic. 3 points, clear, precise, unchanged. I placed it on top of theirs, then stood. "You have until 5, I said. I didn't wait for a response. The walk back felt shorter, not because the hallway had changed, but because the weight I carried wasn't uncertainty anymore. It was resolve. I passed 3 people on my way back to my desk. 2 nodded. 1 looked away. I didn't stop, didn't explain. I sat down, opened my notebook, and recorded the exact time, 3:41 p.m., then I underlined it. Once. At 4:47 p.m., I saw her before I heard her. Vanessa stood at the edge of my desk, folder in hand, jaw set, voice low. The hallway behind her was empty, unusually quiet, as if someone had asked for silence before impact. "We've reconsidered," she said. No apology, no smile, just a shift in tone, precise, reluctant, and structured. She handed me a new document. Same formatting, different substance. They'd adjusted the language. I was now listed as lead system architect, responsible for all design-level decisions. The implementation team would report directly to me, and instead of the 5% bonus, they offered a 12% raise. Not 15, but significantly more than before. I didn't look up right away. I scanned the terms slowly, verified the line that mattered most. Documentation ownership. It was there. Vanessa spoke again. "We expect you to handle this professionally." It wasn't a request. It was a boundary. I nodded once. "I always have," I said, signing with a steady hand. "That's never been the issue." She didn't respond, just gathered the pages and walked off, her heels sharp against the tile. Warren didn't appear, not in person, not by email, not by implication. He had receded. The next morning, an announcement was posted in the internal update thread. No headline, no photograph, just a bullet point update under Client Success, Strategic Accounts. Ardenvale will lead final implementation and technical oversight for Virion Logistics AI system, effective immediately. There were no comments, but by noon, 2 junior engineers I'd once mentored sent short messages to my inbox. "About time. Following your lead." I replied to both, brief, appreciative, and then I closed the thread. That night, I didn't celebrate. I ordered Thai food, sat at my small kitchen table, and stared at the candle I hadn't lit in months, the one I used to keep near my monitor, back when I thought quiet meant invisible. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear. Warren had lost control. But more importantly, so had the system that had protected him. And somewhere beneath that collapse, I found something I hadn't expected. Stillness. Not the stillness of fear, the stillness of space finally being made for you. Not by invitation, but by force. I waited exactly 14 days after the launch before submitting my resignation. Not because I needed to, not because of a contract clause, simply because it felt clean. The system was live, stable, Client training was complete. Feedback was positive. The last implementation audit had closed with 0 flags. There was nothing left for me to carry. So at 8:03 a.m. on a Thursday, I sent the email. 3 sentences: director, cordial, final. Then I logged it, archived a copy, and returned to my day like nothing had changed. Except, of course, everything had. I didn't tell anyone at first. The notice wasn't dramatic. There were no whispers in the hallway. No Slack threads lighting up with questions. Orbian had never known what to do with quiet exits, especially ones that didn't come with outbursts or burned bridges. But people notice absence, even before it's official. By mid-morning, 2 engineers from another team stopped by my desk with questions they didn't really need answered. They lingered, watched me more than the screen. One of them asked if I was going to stay on for the next rollout. I smiled without answering. By the end of the day, word had spread. There was no formal announcement, no company-wide note, just small signals. My name vanished from the project channel. My permissions on the system shifted to read-only. The new team lead for maintenance, someone I'd never trained, was suddenly copied on all handover threads. Still, no one said a word. Warren never acknowledged my decision, not in writing, not in passing. He spent the next 2 weeks walking past my desk like I was furniture, like I had already left. It didn't matter. I didn't need recognition from him. What I needed was already in the structure. Every logic tree still bore my naming conventions. Every routing rule used my fallback logic. Every document, every comment thread, every client-facing brief. My signature wasn't stamped. It was embedded, built into how the system breathed. That was the difference. I wasn't a role anymore. I was architecture. When Virion's executive team returned for final review, they didn't ask for Orbian leadership. They asked for the person who had designed the part of the system they now trusted with millions in live inventory. They asked for me. Ren met me in the lobby. She didn't mention Warren. She didn't mention the past few weeks. She just said, "I'm glad you're still here. Let's walk through the control structure one last time before we move forward." I did, and it took less than 20 minutes because I'd already built everything to stand without me. On my final day, I packed my desk into a slim leather bag, 2 notebooks, 1 laptop, a coffee mug I'd kept hidden behind the monitors, the glass paperweight I'd bought during my 2nd year, back when I still believed hard work would be noticed on its own. There was no cake, no meeting, just a handful of engineers who stopped by and said, "Thank you," like they didn't know if they were allowed to say more. One of them, barely out of grad school, handed me a sticky note with a GitHub handle on it and said, "In case you're building something else someday." I slipped it into my coat pocket. At 6:12 p.m., I logged out of my terminal, shut the lid, returned my badge to the admin desk with a nod, then walked out the front door without looking back. No one followed, but someone had seen. The next morning, even though my account had been disabled and my access removed, one last breadcrumb reached me through a private message forwarded by a friend still inside. It was a line someone had added to the internal Virion documentation, a final note at the top of the implementation schema. System architecture, base logic authored by A. Vale. Do not modify core fallback without trace justification. No signature, no attribution, but it was there, and I knew what it meant. I hadn't just exited a company. I'd left behind something permanent. 3 weeks after I left Orbian, I met Ren again, this time outside of offices and job titles. Over coffee, she made it simple. "We're building something new, and we want you to lead it." The offer was real. Director of Systems Innovation, full autonomy, equity, double my last salary, and a team I'd build from the ground up. I didn't answer right away. I asked about structure, about what happens when the next Arden is overlooked. Ren just said, "Then we've failed, and we won't." I accepted the next morning. Within a month, I hired 2 junior engineers I'd mentored. Women no one had promoted, but everyone had relied on. They said yes without hesitation. Then came the messages. Former colleagues, strangers, people who'd heard. They weren't just looking for jobs. They were looking for escape. I couldn't bring them all with me, but I could point, refer, validate. And in time, a quiet network formed. People who had built quietly, now moving toward spaces that saw them. 6 months in, we launched our first platform. Early, stable, elegant, Virion's CEO sent a handwritten note. Ren forwarded it with just one sentence. It's easier to build when no one's fighting to be seen. Meanwhile, Orbian began to fray. They lost the Archer contract, then another. Warren's team hollowed out. The system I left behind remained, but the people who kept it alive were gone. 1 year later, I spoke at a Women in Engineering conference. The room was full. After the talk, a young woman came up to me, notebook in hand. "I think I'm where you were," she said. "They used my code, not my name." I didn't tell her to confront them. I just said, document everything and don't confuse being quiet with being powerless. 3 years in, my team had grown to 34. We ran innovation across Virion's largest systems. My rule was simple. No one begs to be credited, no one gets silenced. 5 years after the day I stood outside that glass wall, watching others take credit for my work, I received an email. Orbian was looking for a new VP of technology. They wanted to know if I was open to a conversation. I didn't respond, but I forwarded the listing to 4 women in my network, with a note on exactly what salary they should ask for, and what number they should never accept. They erased my name. The system didn't forget,